I'm a big believer in the Washington Commanders going into this season. I have this team penciled in as my biggest sleeper team going into this year. I think they're capable of being able to go 9-8 and clinching the last playoff spot in the NFC. And a large reason why I have so much optimism about the Commanders is because they hired Eric Bieniemy to be their new offensive coordinator. And I was wondering when the national media was going to start paying attention to the Commanders. And surprise, surprise, the Washington Commanders are finally getting talked about. And Eric Bieniemy, his intensity reportedly has some players concerned, according to Ron Rivera. Ron Rivera, in a press conference that he did a couple of days ago, when he was asked about his players being able to adapt to Eric Bieniemy's intensity and have they struggled with it, he said that, yeah, they have. And one of the biggest things is that I had a number of guys come to me and said, hey, just go talk to him. I said, understand what he's trying to get across to you. I think as they go and they talk and they listen to him, it's been enlightening for a lot of these guys. I mean, it's a whole different approach. Again, you're getting a different kind of player from the players back in the past, especially in the light of how things are coming out of the college football. So a lot of these young guys, they do struggle with certain things, and a lot of it is from where they've been. I mean, guys are coming from certain programs are used to it. Guys coming from other programs aren't as much. So us as coaches, I kind of have to assimilate and get a feel for everybody. Eric has had an approach, and it's the way he does things, and it's not going to change because he believes it. Jack Del Rio has his approach. Having been a head coach, I think Jack has a tendency to try to figure guys out a little bit more as opposed to, hey, this is it, this is the way it's going to be, that type of stuff. Eric hasn't had that experience yet. When they came to you, is it just they felt like Eric was riding them too hard? And Ron Rivera said, well, they just were a little concerned. Now, my thoughts on this is that these players, I don't think that they are overly concerned about Eric Bieniemy's coaching style. You guys have to remember that most of these guys in the NFL have been playing football for their whole entire lives, going from pee-wee football, middle school, high school, college, NFL. Eventually, at one point, you get one of those tough coaches. And anybody who ever played football knows about the coaches that get in your face, that like to yell at you a lot. You ever played a game and you was on the defense side of football and you had your head coach screaming at you, move over, 11 or whatever your number was? Sometimes you just have coaches that just do a lot of yelling and that are really intense. And Eric Bieniemy is one of those guys, and that's why I think this was a fantastic hire by Ron Rivera. You see, this franchise has been lacking discipline. And obviously we've seen how the Commanders were in all the years under Dan Snyder when he was the owner. Eric Bieniemy is going to bring a sense of urgency, a sense of discipline, which is what this organization needs. What the Commanders have been lacking for all these years has been structure. Eric Bieniemy is all about structure, and this is somebody that knows what it takes to be a winning organization. He was with the Kansas City Chiefs for several years and won 2 Super Bowls with that organization. So this is somebody that has seen what it takes to build a championship culture in a championship winning organization. And with Ron Rivera, he hasn't really had that kind of success over the last couple of years as a head coach that makes you feel insanely confident that the Commanders are going to have success this year. If the Commanders make it to the playoffs, I believe it's solely going to be because of Eric Bieniemy and how good this offense is going to be. Now, this defense should be as good as what it always has been under Ron Rivera, but the offense is the difference between the Washington Commanders being 8-1 last season and being a 9-8 team or better. Eric Bieniemy, to get this offense playing up to the potential that it could play at, he needs these players to be bought in. And his coaching style, being a little bit intense, being a little bit hard on players, I think is what the Washington Commanders need. And as long as this offense is having success and this team is winning games, this isn't going to be a problem. You see, Bill Belichick is the same way. There are plenty of other coaches who are the same way. The only time this begins to cause issues in the locker room is when you start to lose. And for the players that are going to Ron Rivera complaining about it, I say toughen up a little bit. And what's weird is that more statements have come out over the last couple of hours about Ron Rivera kind of recanting his statements from the other day when he made those quotes about Eric Bieniemy and players voicing a little bit of concern about how hard he comes at them as coaches, or players or whatever. But my thing is that for Ron Rivera, why would you even air that out anyway? I don't really think that's something that the media needed to know. And I don't think that Ron Rivera is worried about his head coaching job getting taken away and him getting replaced by Eric Bieniemy, because if this doesn't work out, I don't think that Eric Bieniemy is going to become the next head coach, because why would you hire somebody who was part of a losing team? I think with a new ownership, they rather just go in a completely different direction and hire their own guy who they choose to bring in. But Ron Rivera needs Eric Bieniemy to work out. And I think that Ron Rivera has a good understanding of what Eric Bieniemy is all about. There have been former players such as Tyreek Hill who have voiced their support for Eric Bieniemy's coaching style, and there have been players such as LaShawn McCoy who have voiced a lot of displeasure with Eric Bieniemy and how he goes about coaching up his players. But when you have a coach like Eric Bieniemy that's hard-nosed, a little old school about discipline, holding guys accountable, guys like LaShawn McCoy are probably going to be a little turned off to that. Not every player likes these kinds of coaches, which is why it's important that you're able to win if you have a guy like Eric Bieniemy on your staff as a coach, because sometimes you can have a coach that's a little too intense, and when things end up going wrong, you can end up losing the locker room. There has to be a little bit of balance when it comes to how hard you go at certain players, because being a head coach isn't just about X's and O's. It's also about knowing your players and knowing how they respond to certain situations and talking to them and communicate them in a way that is able to get them to elevate their play. Why do you think that the Steelers have been able to overachieve over the last couple of years under Mike Tomlin? Because he understands how to motivate his players. He knows how to talk to his players in a way that they respond in a positive way on the field. Eric Bieniemy, with his coaching style, is kind of his way or the hard way. And that may not get the most out of every single guy on the team, but for the guys who do buy in, those are probably going to be the best players on this squad. Tyreek Hill said that Eric Bieniemy was a great coach. And there have been plenty of other players who said a lot of great things about Eric Bieniemy. Andy Reid isn't the nicest guy in the world. People seem to forget that Andy Reid cusses his players out. So with Eric Bieniemy, I don't think that this is something that's going to keep the Commanders from being able to overachieve this year. I still have them at 9-8. This is kind of what I expected. I was waiting for when we were actually going to get a story about Eric Bieniemy and his coaching style. I saw a clip on TikTok a couple of months ago about Eric Bieniemy when he was snapping on Adrian Peterson for being late to practice. And Adrian Peterson said that he got held back by the training staff because they were taking a long time to tape him up. But Eric Bieniemy was like, nah, he isn't trying to hear that. Be accountable. Show up a little bit earlier so you can get the practice on time. Accountability is something that a lot of the younger generation doesn't do a good job at doing. And when you have these old school coaches, a lot of these newer players kind of are a little bit soft. And I'm not saying that in a demeaning, condescending way, but I'm just telling it how it is. Somebody who's played high school football with a lot of people my age and, talking to a lot of people my age who have played football, I'm going to just keep it 100 with you. There aren't a lot of young people around the age of 20 and whatnot who are able to take this kind of coaching. And it shows a lot more about the players than it does the coach. Now, coaches do have to be able to adapt, but Ron Rivera has said that Eric Bieniemy hasn't been doing anything too crazy. He's not making people do 100 sprints up and down the field after practice for missing an assignment or anything. It's just that he's really intense. There's a sense of urgency with Eric Bieniemy, and Eric Bieniemy knows that if he doesn't do his job well, guess what happens? He gets fired. which is why he has that fire, which is why there's always a sense of urgency. He has a different tone in his voice compared to most coaches. If you have a coach like Eric Bieniemy on your staff, you already should understand that there are going to be players who may be a little bit turned off to his coaching, but at the end of the day, it's one team, one goal. If you want to win as a player, you have to be able to buy into your coach. And if a coach can't get you to buy in, then that kind of falls a little bit not just on the coach, but on the player as well. The players have to believe in the coach, and they have to at least give him a shot. You can't be turned off on the guy because he coaches you up too hard. He has a job to do. Not everybody goes about coaching in the same way. That's why everybody has their own distinct style that works and doesn't work. Bill Belichick's style works when you're able to win. That's why he was able to get guys to come to New England, and he didn't really have too many clashes with players because players already knew what they were getting into when they were going to New England. With Eric Bieniemy, he's on a franchise that hasn't had a lot of success in over the last 2 decades and hasn't had a strong structure from an organization standpoint, starting all the way from the top. Eric Bieniemy's trying to get things cleaned up. He's trying to get things lined up in order so they can go out and execute. So I don't think that this is a big deal that a lot of people are making it out to be. Anybody who has ever played football should have at least had 1 or 2 coaches, maybe not the head coach, but at least your defensive coordinator, your offensive coordinator that was really tough on you, that was always yelling, always getting in your face. Hell, when I was in high school playing ball, I had plenty of teammates who were bulking up the coaches because players were feeling a little bit disrespected with how they came at them. And I kind of feel like the players were a little bit in their feelings. You know, some players, when they get yelled at and screamed at by a coach, they kind of get in their feelings a little bit. They get their feelings hurt and they take it personal. This isn't personal. This is business. This is a performance-based business. I tell you guys this all the time. And if you don't perform, guess what happens? People lose their jobs. Eric Bieniemy has a family to provide for. He has to put food on the table. So he goes about coaching the best way he knows how. And even though he hasn't gotten a head coaching job, I don't think this is the reason for him not having one. I just think that these players need to get a little bit used to having a guy like Eric Bieniemy as their head coach. Like I said, I don't get why this is such a big story. Everybody who's played football on some level, from Pop Warner to high school ball, has at least had a coach like Eric Bieniemy that was ultra intense and always kind of getting at his players. And some of these coaches are pretty good, and some of these coaches have been pretty awful. So you guys let me know down in the comment section if you think that this Eric Bieniemy situation is being a little bit overblown. Have you had coaches that have had a similar coaching style to Eric Bieniemy, or do you think that Eric Bieniemy kind of needs to loosen up a little bit if Washington wants to have success? Hell, Tom Coughlin was super intense. He's probably the most intense coach in the history of the league, and he won 2 championships. Although he had to ease up a couple of times, I mean, he was still an ultra intense guy, a guy about structure, a guy about discipline. And I think the guys who are about structure and discipline normally tend to be pretty good head coaches, as long as they don't overdo on it and, you know, go about it in a way that just gets their players to despise them. You still have to be personable. It's not all about, you know, yelling at guys just to yell at them. You have to yell at guys for a reason. When you're yelling at guys, you do it to get them to respond. And a lot of these younger age players that are starting to enter the league, they can't take this kind of coaching. They can't handle old school style coaching because they get into their feelings. And those players normally tend not to be that good, because anytime you have a player that gets in his feelings over hard coaching, he's going to get into his feelings when he ends up making the wrong decision on a play or things are going wrong. These are the kind of players that you don't want on your team. So if anything, all the players that have went up to Ron Rivera and complained about Eric Bieniemy, I think he kind of should be looking at them with the people's eyebrow and kind of trying to evaluate where they lie with this team. Now, if it's some of your star players, okay, but even then, like, it's just some of these younger players, they just can't handle the kinds of coaches that Eric Bieniemy is. Players can't handle being yelled at. They can't handle being overly criticized. This is coming from somebody that's in my 20s and has played with a lot of these newer age football players, man. They just can't handle this kind of coaching. But the ones that do end up being really great. You can't let these kinds of things affect you, man. It's a mental game as well. For coaches getting on you, that should motivate you to play harder, not getting your feelings. There are players that really can't handle Eric Bieniemy kind of coach because they just don't have it. And some players, they can handle these kinds of coaches. But for an organization like the Washington Commanders, you need an Eric Bieniemy. You need an authority figure. You need somebody who's going to come in and lay down the law. Say, no, this is how we're going to do things, and I want it done my way, and have a certain tone about it. Eric Bieniemy is a tone setter. So I'm not overly concerned about this. I think the Washington Commanders are still going to be a playoff team. A lot of people are sleeping on Washington, but I'm wide awake on them, and I hope that you guys start catching on. And I'm glad that Eric Bieniemy is finally being talked about. Like, there are people who don't even know that Eric Bieniemy is the offensive coordinator for the Commanders. So that just tells you everything that you need to know about how people evaluate teams. They just evaluate teams based on what they have on the depth chart and talent, but coaching also matters as well.